Hello juniors, and welcome back to Computer Systems and Programming. For this video, we're going to be learning about loops and how we actually make these in Python. So the first thing you're going to do is open up Eclipse and make a new project called Loops. I've already made one, but to make one you just go File, New, PyDev Project, fill in the project name and click Finish. Then once you're finished making the project, you're going to go to Canvas and download loopoutline.py. You're going to download this and then follow along these tasks as we go through it, and I'll be explaining how to do each of these tasks. So let me get back to Eclipse. For me, I'm just going to make a new PyDev module and just name it practice, but you should be working out of that outline.py. So loops are really similar to conditional statements. For conditional statements, if a condition is true, then a block of code happens. For loops, it's the same concept, but the block of code keeps happening as long as the condition is true. So let me put it in one sentence. While a condition is true, a block of code will repeat. So let's go over the structure of it a little bit, and let me tell you that there are two types of them. So we're going to cover two different types of loops. The first one is a while loop. Whoops. And so it's while this condition is true, colon, then code block. And that's all. And then this repeats as long as the code block is true. Again, just like conditional statements, this has to be tabbed in, otherwise it does not work. This code block, everything that you want in the code block has to be tabbed in. So let's go through the second type, or the second structure, which is for. So with the for loop, the way it works is for item in iterable, and I'll explain what that means, colon, code block. And we'll go through examples of all these, but this is the same concept for an item in this iterable thing. What iterable means is to repeat. So iterables are types of objects that can be repeated. They're variables that can be repeated. So this means that they're lists or strings. Because if you remember, lists have items. They have the different items at different indexes, and that's how lists work. Strings also have items because they have each character in it. So for strings, you're going to iterate, go through, repeat through. I'm just saying synonyms. You're going to iterate through the different letters of the string. And for the list, you're going to iterate through the different items in the list. So let's go through some actual examples of these so you can see how it works with some real code. So let's start with the while loop. A while loop, like I said, repeats itself as long as the condition within the parentheses is true. So if we have a variable called I equals 0, and we say while I is less than 10, then, again using colon, then print I, and then do I equals I plus 1. Now this line of code is one of the most important things you're going to learn while using while loops, especially while using any types of loops, but especially with while loops. Now, if we run this, so go File, Run As, Python Run, all you see is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This loop did exactly what it was supposed to do. It starts off with I equaling 0. And then it says while I is less than 10, print I and add 1 to I. That's what this line means. It's adding 1 to what I already is. So I is a number. It's going to add 1 to it and replace whatever was in it. So when we start off with 0, I goes in, 0 is less than 10. So then it prints out 0. And then it goes 0 plus 1 is 1. So I equals 1. Then since it's a while loop, it goes back to the condition and it checks 1 is less than 10. And then it says 1 is less than 10. That's true. So it does the code block, print I. And it prints out 1 because that's what I is. And then it adds 1 to I. So then it goes to 2. And it repeats. And it keeps doing this all the way up until I gets the 10. Then is 10 less than 10? No. So it exits the loop. It exits it. And we can check this by, if we add another one, if I equals 10, 10, then print I is 10. And we'll put that in text so that we know it's separate from this loop. And we run this, and it prints that because I gets all the way up to 10. This while loop keeps adding it until it gets to 10. And then it exits the while loop. Then it hits this if statement. So while loops, all loops are kind of hard to talk about because I'm looking at this stagnant image, this no motion image. You can't see it changing through all of these numbers. So what I'm going to do to kind of help you see this is I'm going to go into a different mode. This is called debugging mode. And so there's a lot more windows. You don't need to worry about this. We will cover this later in the course. But for right now, you just need to pay attention to what I point out. So I'm going to run this in debugging mode. Actually, first I'm going to put this little breakpoint here. And I'm going to run this in debugging mode. And what this allows me to do is stop it at each line. So I can step through and you can watch this program. And you can see on the right hand side, there's my variable I. It equals 0 because it's set up. So we're on this line and it's saying while I is less than 10. I is 0, 0 is less than 10. So it goes into the loop. It prints I, and you see it print out, and then it adds I to 1. So watch this in the top right. Once I do this line, it adds to 1. Now it's going to repeat. It's first going to check the condition. Is I less than 10? I is 1. 1 is less than 10. So it goes into the loop. It prints out I, which prints out 1. And then it adds 1 to I. Boop. And then repeats. So now I is 2. Is 2 less than 10? Yup. So it goes into the loop. And it's going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep going down. And you're going to see it increase. So now it's 6, prints out 6. 7, prints out 7. 8, prints out 8. 9, prints out 9. And then you see it adds. It's going to add 1 to 10 to make I 10. And then it gets back to the condition. It's going to check the condition. And it's going to find out that 10 is not less than 10. So it's going to skip the loop and end the program. So that was a lot, but it's all just to say that you're just going through this loop. You're just adding 1. All it's doing is adding 1 and printing out the number. So let's go through another example. This was a while loop. Let's go through the for loop example. So next we're going to go through a for loop. So a for loop works by going through an iterable item. Again, an iterable is something that can return its items one at a time. So a string can return one character at a time, and a list can return one item in the list at a time. But like Booleans, they don't have one item that they can return. So they're not iterable. But a list and a string, those are iterable. So let's go through this example of a for loop. Let's make this list and let's just put some numbers in it. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if we say for x for each item in var, this list var, we're going to put a colon. We're going to say print x. And then we'll enter and leave that loop. So this loop goes through the iterable variable, which is var, which is this list var that we've made. And for each item in var, it's going to print it out. So let's try this let's run this, and you'll see it prints out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 because it prints out each item in the list. Now let's try this. Let's make var a different type of list. Let's make it, a bunch of booleans. It's still going to work the same way, where it's going to go through each item in the list and print them out. So it prints out true, false, false, true, because those are all the items in the list. Let's go through one last example. Let's change var into a string variable. Let's make it my name. If we run this now, var equals Michael, for x in var, for each item in this variable var, we're going to print x. And if we run it with this Michael string, it's going to print out each letter in my name separately. So this for loop is really nice when you're working with lists and strings to just print out everything. Or if you're only trying to print out some things, you can add if statements and stuff inside of these. Now the last thing I want to show you is a break statement. So the way all a break statement does is it ends the loop wherever it's at. So if we run it with this for loop, what's going to happen is it's just going to print m, because what happens is for x in var, it's going to go through and print the first item, which is m, and then it's going to break, which breaks the loop and ends the loop, and then it exits the loop and it's done, and everything is done. So if we go back up to this example where it's just counting, and we say if, not capital, if I equals 4, then break. So now what we're saying is if I equals 4, end the loop. We don't need to do it. And now we can do this and run it, and you'll see that it's only going to print 0, 1, 2, 3, because it's going to get to 4, it's going to add up to 4, and then it'll say I equals 4, and then it'll end the loop. So let's go back to debugging mode, and we'll run the same one, run it in debug. And so it stopped at this while loop. So I equals 0, it prints 0, it adds 1, and then it checks that and it's false. And then it goes back up, checks if I is less than 10, it is, prints I, adds 1 to I. Is I equal to 4? No, so it skips it. And so is 2 less than 10? Yep, adds 1 to I, gets to 3, and then 3 is not equal to 4, so it skips that. Now, one more time, it prints 3, adds 1 to I, so now I is 4. If 4 equals 4, so that comes out to be true. So this happens, it's going to go into this, have the break happen, and it's going to end the loop, and it'll be done. Even though the loop goes all the way until all the way until I equals 10, it stops it early, so it can stop things mid-break. This can be nice for if you're working with like very large lists. So let's say we're doing a list and we got a bunch of names in it. Michael, AJ, Juan, Chucky. Now, if we add an if statement, we say if x equals AJ, then break. Because let's say this is a super long list of data and we don't know how many things are in it and we only want to go until AJ, we can just add this if statement that will break the loop after it hits AJ. So if we run this, you'll see that it prints Michael and AJ. Let me leave this view. You'll see it prints Michael and then moves on, and then it goes back to the beginning of the loop, prints AJ, and then since x now equals AJ, it ends the loop. So let's go into debug mode and try running this, and let's go through all this. So now we have our variable, and look, this is how it shows strings in this debug mode. It's pretty cool because it shows you the index and what's at each index. So at index 1 or at index 0 is Michael, index 1 is AJ, index 2, etc., etc. And with the total length equaling 4. There's 4 items in the list. But that's a side fact. If we step through, it's going to print out Michael because x equals Michael, and then it's going to print that out. And then it's going to check, does x equal AJ? And it doesn't because x equals Michael, and it moves on. Then it's going to change x to AJ, which is the next item in the list, print it out, and it prints out AJ. And then it's going to check, does x equals AJ? Well, x does equal AJ. It'll enter the loop and then end it, which ends the whole program because there's no more code. So the 3 things that we covered in this video are the while loop, the for loop, and then this break statement that you can use with either of the loops. Now the while loop is good because you have a lot of customizability. You can put whatever condition you want in here and it will follow that conditional statement. So you could just put a Boolean variable in here and it'll run as long as it's true. And this is a good way to have games work. If you want them just to start, you can just start with a while true and then have them go. I'm going to undo all that and put that back. This for loop, again, is good for going through iterable items. So these lists and these strings, it's good to just go through them. It's easy to make these simple two-line print statements where it prints out everything inside of it. That's what a lot of these for loops are used for. And then this break statement is good to break up these. So let's talk about errors. So remember, an error or bug is something that is wrong with the program, and there's 2 different types of them. There's syntax errors, which means that there's a problem with the program's syntax, or a logical error, which means that there's a problem with the program's logic. So for syntax errors, remember there are 2 types of loops with different syntax. There's a while loop that has the while condition, while parentheses condition parentheses colon, and then the code block. And then there's the for loop that has the for, the item in iterable, and then the code block. So if we mess up one of those pieces, the iterable, the condition, the item, that will mess up the whole program. So common syntax errors are mistyping the for or while, missing the parentheses around the conditional statements, missing the colon block, missing the colon, not having the code block tabbed in, or having a broken condition, a condition that doesn't work, where the comparison is just wrong. Or just simply missing one of these statements, missing the in, missing the for, missing the while. Some logical errors. There aren't common logical errors because it normally depends case by case, but the logical errors are normally something wrong with the condition, the stuff in the parentheses. So you'll normally not have an iterable variable because logically that doesn't work. Or you'll forget the less than or something. You'll put a greater than, because notice if we put this greater than, this loop never happens. But if we put less than, the loop happens. So that's just a common logical error where logically or syntax wise, if I do this, there's nothing wrong with this. But logically, this code will never happen because I starts off as 0 and is never bigger than 10. So those are kind of logical errors that you can pay attention to by reading what the code is supposed to do and then looking at it and seeing, does this condition do that? Does it repeat while I is less than 10? So by now you should have completed the outline. As I was going through this, you should have had an example that you can put in each of the tasks for the outline. To submit that, you're just going to go to Canvas and follow the activity prompt with the GitHub submission process. Then once you complete that, you're going to work on the loops drills.py. So you can go on here, download it, drag it and drop it into your loops folder on your desk or in your Python folder. And you're going to go down and complete all these different types of loops. You've got 3 while loops and 3 for loops that you've got to complete with some examples, with an example right here. Once you complete that, you'll go back to the loop drills activity prompt and submit the link to your GitHub. Again, following the GitHub submission process. Then you're going to go to the Debug Loops. So you go on here, you're going to download it, bring it into your Python, and start editing it. And again, this is going to be 4 different functions that are going to have errors with it. So again, don't worry about this function, this return, or this define line. That's not where the error will be. The error will be with these loops. So focus on the loops. So right here, I see 1 or 2 errors just in this one line. So you're going to go down these. It tells you that there's 4 errors in the counting, 3 errors in the fruits, 3 errors in the check students, and 2 errors in the printing. So you're going to go down and find each of the errors. You don't have to look at the stuff down here. You're just going to look at the stuff in the function, in this stuff, and check for those errors. Then once you complete that, you'll go to the activity prompt and submit it just like you submitted all the other ones following the GitHub submission process. If you get confused during any of this, you can go to our exercises, and there's more examples of all this with the answers. If you're still confused, you can look at the programming manual, which provides a written documentation of everything that I just went through in this video. So it kind of walks you through how to use loops in a written format. Then if none of that makes sense to you and you don't like my teaching, you can go to the W3 Schools or Tutorials Point to learn more about loops. And for W3 Schools, there's a different page for each one, for the while and for the for loop. And for the Tutorials Point, it's all in one. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to your instructor. Otherwise, juniors, I will see you later.